Okay, so this is going to be a video on RS Aero gel coat repair. Here we can see what we're going to be repairing, the result of a racing incident last weekend where a Musto skiff backed into a plucky little aero on the start line. I'm not sure I should name the Musto skiff, but it was Andy Gould of Emsworth Slipper Sailing Club. Anyway, we are going to look at how to prepare this to be repaired. We're going to repair it with gel coat and finish it such that it's invisible. One thing you'll notice about this repair, it's only gel coat. There's no damage to the laminate underneath the gel coat. There's some blue paint that we'll get rid of as well, but this is, despite looking a bit awful, it's actually superficial. There's no underlying damage, there's nothing I can feel behind it. Just gel coat has been scraped away from the laminate. That's what we're going to be preparing, and we're going to start with our Dremel. So we've already done some preparation to the boat. It's been washed down just with washing up liquid and hot water. It's been put inside, and this room is a room temperature because that's good for gel coat work. Now we're going to take our Dremel and we're going to prepare the repair to receive gel coat. What I'm looking to do here is get out all loose material. I'm looking to make sure there's no sharp edges and that everything is ground back ever so slightly so the gel coat can make a good mechanical bond. What I'm using is a Dremel with a small grinding bit that does this job very efficiently. Right, so let's do it now. Okay, so we've used our Dremel now to take all of the loose material out, prepare the repair. This is just some rubbing alcohol, and I'm using it to clean any dust and any last particles out of there, because I want that to be absolutely clean before my gel coat gets applied. Oh look, it's taking off some of that blue paint as well. Now that's applied, now I've cleaned it using my rubbing alcohol there. I've just got a hot air gun. This doesn't need to be very hot. And I just want to make sure that everything is completely dry here. No water, no alcohol, no nothing before we start to, before we continue with our repair. Then a final thing for preparation, I always do this. This is 3M masking tape, and I'm just going to line the edges of the repair, and the reasons for this will become apparent later, but it just makes the later jobs a little bit easier, or the later parts of this fix a bit easier. So I'm just going to put some masking tape all around. I always use 3M masking tape, and the reason I use 3M masking tape is that when you take it off, it doesn't leave any sticky residue behind. Always comes off cleanly. Okay, so this is what we need to do the actual gel coat repair itself. This is our gel coat. We've sourced this from RS Sailing, Aero White. Does everything on your boat: hull, centerboard, rudder. This is the catalyst that comes with our Aero White gel coat. The mixing proportions for gel coat to catalyst are 100 to 2. This has got to be 2% volume. When you're using really small quantities, that's very difficult to measure out. So a rule of thumb is a level teaspoon of gel coat equals 2 drops of catalyst. Something clean to mix our gel coat in, something clean to stir our gel coat with, and this is some tape that we put on top of the repair. Now, final thing, there are two types of gel coat that you can buy, waxed and unwaxed. If you have waxed gel coat, you don't need to cover it up when you're repairing. It will naturally dry when it's open to the air. If it's unwaxed, then you need to put some sort of cover on top of the repair, either plastic or tape, otherwise it won't set up properly. I don't know whether this is waxed or unwaxed, so I'm going to assume that it's unwaxed and cover my repair, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So, the first thing I'm going to do is get a little bit of gel coat in my pot here. I don't need huge amounts because it's not a huge repair. I need more than that though. Right, I think that will probably do. And I would say that that is probably about 2 teaspoons worth. So I'm going to go 4 drops of my catalyst and a couple more because I want it set up quickly. Then I'm going to spend the best part of a minute mixing this. If it's not mixed thoroughly, it doesn't go off properly. So we have to be absolutely confident that this is thoroughly mixed. Then we'll get it on the boat. So we're all mixed, clean stirrer, and now it's time to try and fill this repair with gel coat. The objective here is to ensure there's no air bubbles and that the repair is filled but not overfilled. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that all of the perimeter has got a good bond there. So there's not actually very much required. Good. Right, that's probably enough. Now, I'm going to take the piece of tape, pre-cut here, and I'm going to put that over my repair, like this, trying to keep air bubbles out. There we go. There's 1 or 2 air bubbles, but we'll live with that. Okay. Now, we have to wait for that to go off. And the way that we understand it's gone off is by keeping hold of this old pot of gel coat, our excess gel coat here. And once that sets, we can be confident that the gel coat that's under our tape here, repairing our boat, has also set. So put this to one side and we'll probably have to wait 10 or 15 minutes now for this to set up. Okay, so a bit about the abrasives, the sanding equipment that we're going to be using. What we see here is a range of abrasives. And at one end of our range here, we've got 180 grit wet and dry paper. This is very, very coarse, too coarse for what we're going to be doing today. The next up is 320. That's where we're going to be starting, a sort of medium coarse wet and dry paper. Then we go up through from 400, 600, 800, 1000, 1200, 1500. All of these get progressively finer grit. Then we move on to more abrasives. So these are sometimes called polishes, but they've got abrasive elements to them. They remove material from the gel coat. This is equivalent, this far clay here is about equivalent to 2000 grit wet and dry paper. This is a 3M fiberglass restorer. It claims to be a wax as well as a polish, but really we're using that as a polish. This is a very, very fine polish. This one on the end is not a polish. This is a wax, and that gets used for the final coat on top of the repair. So what we're looking at doing is starting at the very coarse end of the spectrum with our 320 grit paper, and we're going to work our way all the way through until we get to our very final polish and wax finish. Okay, so my gel coat has set. You can see in my pot here, it's gone completely hard, so I can be confident that the gel coat in my repair is set. It has set. Another little test, I'll try and get my thumbnail in. If I can't get my thumbnail in, I know it's set. Okay, so here are my squares of wet and dry paper, 320, 400, as we've already discussed. I'm going to start with a 320 grit and a sanding block. And I've got a bucket here of warm water, just with a drop of washing up liquid in it. Literally a drop of washing up liquid. It helps the wet and dry bite into the gel coat. I don't need to go overboard with water. What I'm doing now is I'm just trying to take the excess material off the repair. You can see it's coming off. The purpose of having the masking tape in place here is that when I get to the masking tape, I know I've got the material flush with the original boat. If I were to carry on sanding on this side, now I've gone through this masking tape here, I'd be taking off gel coat that was outside my repair. That's not what I want to do. So I finished that side. You can see the gel coat's ever so slightly sad. Look, I'm going down through at the bottom here now. So I know that the gel coat there is about right. Okay, still a little bit more to come off this end. But that is about as far as I want to go with this 320 grit paper. I've taken off excess material till it's just about flush with the surface of the boat. Now we can take off that masking tape. That's been our guide so far. Good. And I can see there's still a little bit to come off, but not much. Now, when I'm taking off the first lot of material, I nearly always use the sanding block, but when it gets to this point where there's not much left to take off, I tend to go around the curve of the deck like this, on a curved surface at least. So it's much easier to actually feel with your fingers than it is to see with your eyes when you're doing gel coat work. So at the moment I can feel on the bottom it's pretty much flush on this edge, but I can feel a bit of a lip on the top there, so I'm going to take that lip off. There we go, still a lip. Okay, now that's just about flush. It's time to go up through the other papers. Okay, so I've sanded the repair flush with the deck using my 320 grit paper. What you can see here is an air bubble that was in the gel coat. Now, if you're a perfectionist like me, you're not going to let that go. So what we now have to do is go through the same process again to fix that as if it were a repair. So get the Dremel on it, grind it out a little bit, fill it with gel coat, wait for it to set up and then sand it flat again, which I will do. I've gone full Swiss on it. Okay, so we've filled those well, there was a tiny air bubble and a bigger air bubble, and fed that back with 320. And now we're going to quickly work our way through the remaining grits, starting with 400. All I'm trying to do here is take out the scratches that have been left by the previous grit, in this case the 320. So I'm not trying to remove a lot of material, I'm just trying to move scratches, that's all. And I do this in a series of overlapping areas. So this is 600 grit, and it needs a slightly bigger overlap than the 400, so I get all of the 400 grit scratches out, only leaving a set 600. That's good. Always clean in between, otherwise you end up with all of that between the sandpaper and the deck. 800 grit. Again, a very slightly larger sanding area. The dark is just the grit coming off the paper, that's all. Again, a quick wipe down. What's good now is that I can barely distinguish the repair from the surrounding area on the boat. This is 1000 grit paper. Again, a slightly larger area. And now I'm going to use this 1000 grit paper to see whether it's enough to get rid of this blue staining. And it is. There we go. That's 1000 grit. Nearly there, Oscar. Yeah. 1200 grit. Remembering to clean between. Oh, look, still a little bit blue, I'll get that out. So 1200 grit. Again, slightly larger area. And then my final sandpaper, the wet and dry paper, which is 1500 grit, which is the finest grit that I will use. Again, we want a clean area. Wet paper. Now, I can distinguish the repair very slightly from the deck, and the reason for that is that the deck's probably slightly oxidized compared to the colour of the gel coat that we've used, but it's barely distinguishable. Next we polish. 1500 wet and dry, it feels silky smooth to the touch, but if I look at the deck against the light, I can see that's matte, whereas the surrounding areas are gloss. And we get that to a gloss finish now by using, first of all, this coarse grit compound. We only need a tiny amount. Clean cloth, and all I'm doing is using that as a rubbing compound. So what this is doing in effect is taking out the 1500 grit scratches and replacing them with 2000 or 2500 grit scratches. Okay. So still a slightly dull finish, but getting towards a gloss finish. Slightly dull. Wipe any excess material off the back of my clean cloth. Next, some of this fiberglass restorer. Again, you really don't need very much. I would say that's the size of a large pea. That's probably too much actually. That again, all I'm doing is taking scratches out from the cutting compound I was using before. There we go. Good. That's that. Now that looks glossy, but not glossy enough. So finally, we have this very light compound that's got as much wax in it as compound. Again, another clean cloth. Worked over the whole area. The actually, I think that'll probably do. So there we have it. That is one repaired Aero following an altercation with Andy Gould in his Musto. Let's hope we don't have any issues next weekend. Hope that's been useful.